It's been 25 years since the launch of the original PlayStation, and while games have evolved by leaps and bounds in the 2.5 decades since, it's impossible to deny the lasting impact Sony's flat gray box had on the industry and pop culture at large. From bandicoots to battle-hardened super soldiers, the PlayStation is single-handedly responsible for some of the most iconic characters and franchises of all time. And while there are so many to love, we wanted to look back at the very best the console had to offer. These are the greatest PS1 games of all time.
If it isn't Crash Bandicoot.
Naughty Dog's mascot platforming trilogy became synonymous with the original PlayStation immediately after its first release, but it's the second of these three games that has remained in our hearts and minds all these years later. Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back is a great middle ground between the original's platforming and Warp's expansive arsenal techniques and secrets. As Crash climbs his way up a series of chambers full of challenging platforming levels, Naughty Dog's gauntlet of jumping, spinning, and whoa-ing offers some of the franchise's best levels, offering players a true challenge, but in a way that always felt achievable. Vagrant Story is perhaps one of the original PlayStation's most underrated games, a massive action RPG developed by a powerhouse RPG hit machine helmed by one of the most underrated directors of the last 25 years. It's a game that in many ways almost shouldn't work. It stacks an almost ludicrous amount of systems on top of a plot dense with political intrigue, dark magic, and at least 2 textbooks worth of ancient history, but it all comes together in a truly exceptional experience. You'll manage special attacks, customize weapons tailored for specific enemy types, build your own armor, solve puzzles, and fight some of the hardest bosses this side of Dark Souls using a quasi-rhythm-based battle system. While it remains one of the most underrated and oft-forgotten entries in Square's PlayStation catalog, that doesn't prevent this hidden gem from being one of the best that the console had to offer. The universally acclaimed Tekken 3 remains one of the most respected fighting games ever made. But it was its astonishing ability to lure in even non-fighting game fans that really helped make Tekken 3 one of the most iconic games on the console. Adding a third axis to the action and allowing players to dodge left and right, circling their opponents, was a seismic shift for Namco's seminal slugfest. A cocktail of wacky cinematics, eclectic characters, and bruising beatings, the King of Iron Fist tournament is the undisputed champ when it comes to PS1 fighting games, and will always remain up there with the very best fighters in the business. At the very least, it's the reason an entire generation of gamers knows what capoeira is. Cheers, Eddie Gordo.
What was that?
Though it enjoyed a cracker of a remake in 2018, the power of the original Resident Evil 2 is still untouched. Set in a bizarro police station, an elaborate evolution of the first game's haunted house theme, Resident Evil 2 combined ornate, weird puzzles with a plethora of nasties that range from the garden variety zombie to more out-there monstrosities like a giant moth and a sentient mutated poison ivy. Throw in a hulking, seemingly invulnerable tyrant that relentlessly pursues you and the ability to play from 2 different perspectives, and you've got an all-time horror classic. The original Tomb Raider is, at its heart, a haunting solo adventure, a quiet jaunt through an aggressive world that mixes up real-life beasts like wolves and bears with dinosaurs and cat mummies. While it cemented Lara Croft as a video game icon that would span several more generations, the original Tomb Raider should also be celebrated for its genius with intricate level design and properly awe-inspiring environments. Plus, a shotgun that you can still feel through the ages. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 isn't just regarded by many as the most monumental game in the series, and it isn't just considered one of the greatest sports games ever made, it's one of the highest rated video games of all time. No matter what some desperate ding-dongs trying to review bomb at 18 years too late may think, Tony Hawk 2 was an absolute cultural haymaker, marrying exquisite arcade extreme sports action with a soundtrack that launched a million mixtapes. The original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was one of the most influential and iconic games of its era, and adding more moves, a simple but wildly addictive skate park editor, and a sack full of searing good songs made this stunning sequel a spectacular refinement of the formula. Taking nothing away from the original pioneering Gran Turismo, the best-selling PlayStation game of all time and the godfather of all console racing sims, Gran Turismo 2 was everything the first installment was and much more. An absolute beast of a racing game, so stuffed with content that it had to ship on 2 CDs. With almost 650 cars from over 30 manufacturers, the scope of GT2 was unprecedented, dwarfing its otherwise excellent 1999 crosstown rival Need for Speed High Stakes. The PS1 played host to a small but fondly remembered selection of serious racing games back in the late 90s, like the Toka and Colin McRae series, but Gran Turismo 2 was the biggest and broadest of the lot, and it was the only one that came with a scratch and sniff disc. Releasing an old-looking 2D Castlevania on the PlayStation seemed like a strange move to some in 1997. Even IGN's original review reads it looks like the same old 2D platform action as before. Other classic franchises had already made the jump into the third dimension, and new games like Tomb Raider were showing what the PS1 could do that previous consoles could not. But keeping Symphony of the Night 2D allowed Konami to refine Castlevania's gameplay to absolute perfection, and its beautiful pixel art has aged much better than most of its 3D contemporaries. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is about as close to a perfect video game as one can get, one that's still being copied and iterated on today by modern developers. Final Fantasy VII is almost solely responsible for putting JRPGs on the map. No one had ever seen anything quite like it when it launched on the original PlayStation in 1987, and it's second only to Gran Turismo in units sold, for good reason. The dark sci-fi storyline and its incredibly of-the-times character design took a whimsical fantasy franchise and brought it to an international audience in a way that neither Sony or Square could have possibly predicted. It's a timeless classic that spawned an entire universe of spin-offs and one stellar remake that absolutely deserves all of its praise, despite some of its more glaring shortcomings. Long before we had the intricate sandbox of the Phantom Pain, and before the twisting plots of the Patriots or diatribes and the complex political realities of war, the third entry in Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear series cardboard box crawled its way into the PS1, and things were never the same again. Metal Gear Solid offered a singularly unique blend of stealth action gameplay and coupled it with a wholly bizarre yet utterly delightful cast of characters, and a story that challenged our ideas of traditional video game heroes and pushed the boundaries of cinematic storytelling in video games at the same time. All of these exceptional elements, plus some truly unforgettable breaks in the fourth wall, combined to create a gaming experience that still holds up as one of the best to this day. And those are our picks for the best games on the original PlayStation. Did any make your list that weren't on ours? You can check out our full list of the top 25 PS1 games on IGN, or if you want to look ahead, be sure to follow all of our coverage of the upcoming PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X.
Beginning in June, watch IGN's exclusive Summer of Gaming content for the latest and greatest in game reveals, news, trailers, next-gen coverage, and more. Tune in wherever you like to watch IGN or on IGN 1 on your Samsung TVs.